Bonjour and hello and welcome to our session and to the end of the school day. So this is our second kindergarten data drop-in for French immersion. Comment utiliser les données du dépistage? And I'm here with Angeline Humber, who's going to take over. But first, I'm going to go through our land acknowledgement. Nous reconnaissons que le travail d'ONlit se déroule sur des territoires autochtones traditionnels. Nous reconnaissons que 46 traités et autres accords couvrent le territoire qui s'appelle aujourd'hui l'Ontario. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler sur ces terres et nous sommes reconnaissants envers les Premières Nations, aux Métis et aux Inuits pour les soins qu'ils apportent à ces terres ainsi que les enseignements qu'ils en tirent. Cette reconnaissance nous rappelle nos responsabilités à l'égard de nos relations et des terres ancestrales sur lesquelles nous apprenons, travaillons et vivons. So welcome to our session this afternoon, and I'm going to pass you over to Angeline right away, who's going to do most of the talking, and I'm going to pop back on for questions in a little bit.
I was going to say, I know that when it gets to the Q&A, I love our collaborative discussions. So today we're just going to quickly go through some of the details about using the data that we have from our screeners, and then of course get to those questions and responses, which is definitely my highlight that I look forward to hearing what your questions are. So always looking at, those definitions and ensuring coherent understanding. So knowing that those screeners, we're doing them with all of the students, beginning, middle, and end of year is research recommended, and really looking at that as our indicator of risk. So is there a temperature? Is there a fever? That's kind of like that triage at the hospital, moving into that diagnostic assessment that really helps us to identify which skill sets that we need to be working on, and then leading into that progress monitoring. Is the intervention working? And looking at recommended, it's once every 2 weeks, and that really tells us, is our intervention working? So really helping us answer those questions. Qui a besoin d'aide? So that's looking at that screening data. Que devrait être cette aide? So that's where that diagnostic assessment comes in. And then is it working? That's the progress monitoring. So why? And we all know, many of us have seen this graphic before, but it's become very, very clear to me in the work that we've been doing in our schools that the earlier we support, the better, the more impact it has. I've also been reading some research, and they really, kindergarten and grade 1, if we can target and support those students, then it really saves a lot of time, money, stress, effort later on. So looking at how we can do that to really narrow that gap for our learners. And especially in an additional language program, not only are we supporting them learning to read, but it impacts them when they're reading to learn. So really looking at how can we support that early on. There is a document from Acadience. I know that some boards may be using other screening, but there is a document from Acadience when you're making decisions in and around which to use. It really just provides some information about if you are using Acadience, which language of screener you may select. And there's just some really great points for consideration in there. And just reflecting on, the PPM 168 that tells us that whether students in year 2 of kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, that they are needing to complete that mandatory screening in the language of instruction of the program or of the school board in which they're enrolled at the time screening is administered, but that you're making that decision of the mandatory use of ministry approved tools and the provisions of a tiered approach to reading instruction. So really leaving that to school boards, but having those conversations around what your students and what is going to support them the most. I know it looks much different in a 100% model in a diverse population than a 50-50 model. So thinking about that, and this document does provide some conversation around that. Looking at the screener, so the beginning of year screener really highlights some of that phonological awareness, alphabetic principle, and the basic phonics skills at the beginning of year, if you're using Acadience. So looking at the facilité à reconnaître le premier son et facilité à dénommer des lettres, and together those formulate that composite score. And looking at those benchmarks for beginning of year, And I think that it's really, especially in kindergarten, noticing the difference in what happens in the beginning of years. So knowing that we're looking at faciliter à reconnaître le premier son et identifier les lettres, but then the middle of year jumps. So looking at, they're looking at le premier son, segmenter des phonèmes, lire des non-mots. So thinking about that, and when we're making decisions around using the screener and who we might like to use it with, that's really beneficial information to consider. So thinking about your grouping, so now you have your data, and we have I don't know, I love data, so I just think of the richness of the data that we have now and how much it tells us, and how might we use them to create our groupings. So if we consider that facilité à reconnaître le premier son is épreuve 1 et le score composite c'est épreuve 2. So when we're looking at group 1, it's where those students are they're okay in both of those skill sets. So that is really just looking at maintaining that strong tier 1 core instruction. Group 2, they're doing okay with their first sound recognition, but their overall score needs support. Group 3, it's their first sound awareness requires support, but their composite score is okay. And group 4, it's where both of those areas require additional support. So this is just a sample of a kindergarten class, and you can see just by looking at this how you might consider grouping those students to provide additional support. And it's not so much about the colors. I really think it's important not only to look at those colors, but the numbers, and consider the grouping sheet that is provided through Acadience. It really just takes those things that we mentioned 2 slides back and puts them into a format to support making those groups. So you'll see here, group 1 is that likely to need core support. Group 2, additional support on phonemic awareness and letter sound skills. Group 3, additional support on phonemic awareness. And group 4, additional support on phonemic awareness and letter sound skills. So if we look, so group 1, of course, continuing with that tier 1, strong tier 1 instruction. Group 2, conscience phonemique et compétences lettres son. Groupe 3, conscience phonemique. Et groupe 4, conscience phonemique et compétences lettres son. What we can do is, if we need to narrow it down and look at those specific skills where students require support, is use the Éclair diagnostic assessment tool to see, is it fusionner les phonèmes, isoler le phonème initial, isoler le phonème final, segmenter les phonèmes. And recently, a spreadsheet was created that aligns Éclair. And I know that this looks overwhelming when you look at it. It's in the folder that has the Éclair resource in it through the GEC DSB. But the one thing that educators are appreciating about this new spreadsheet is it will tell you exactly which skill set that student may need to work on. So for example, segmenter les phonèmes, isoler le phonème final, faciliter la lecture orale et compréhension. So you can see just it will auto-populate those, and it will also tell you which progress monitoring tool you might choose to use if you are using Acadience Reading Français. So thinking about that, what does that look like? And so it's that tier 1 instruction is really that whole group learning, but you're also, I know that we have conversations around UFly progress monitoring and sonograph progress monitoring. So that kind of targets is this whole group instruction piece working. And then looking at that tier 2. So that's that strategic small group instruction. And I like to think of it, I know we've had a lot of conversations with our special education department, it's the additional dosage. So it's not that they're doing something entirely different, it's that they're getting more of the support that they need in order to get there. And of course, tier 3, looking at that more intensive support in individual or very small groups where they're getting even more dosage. The one thing that we've had a lot of conversations about is looking across our board. We would love to have more interventionists. We would love to have more learning support educators, but knowing that there's not always someone else coming to support your students. So within your classroom, how can you maximize the time to really provide the support that the students need in your classroom? So thinking about that routine, looking at that 30-30-30, and of course, noting that this says grade 1 to 3, looking a little bit different in kindergarten, of course. where you have that 30 minutes of that explicit instruction, and then targeting that small group based on student needs. So looking at their word recognition and or language comprehension. And then, of course, especially in immersion, making sure we have those opportunities for really rich language production and interaction with students. Really appreciate this document. So looking at what could you fly look like in kindergarten, especially in connection to pulling out those materials and things, and really appreciate the FAQ section of this also. And thinking about what your next steps look like, the Next Steps in Literacy instruction book is really a wonderful book, just looking at how it breaks down each of the components of reading and talks about strategies that you can use to support those specific skills and how you can put them into place. So really looking at targeting those specific learning needs for learners. And of course, as providing intervention, using those progress monitoring tools along the way to make sure that that small group targeted intervention is working. And if not, considering what do I need to change based on my instruction, the group composition, the materials I'm using, and of course, considering the timing. And for some students, it might be that you might need more time. For some students, it might mean that you need to chunk that time, especially in kindergarten, that you're making it into smaller chunks of meaningful instruction. So thinking about that, there's a great section that starts on page 16 of Next Steps in Literacy Instruction that just provides some reflective questions to support that planning based on the results of your progress monitoring. And Jordan, I'm not sure if as I was going through that, there was anything that you thought, oh, Angeline, maybe we could talk about this for a moment, or
I think the question I hear the most in French immersion is around um, just more specifics on how to use something like Éclair. Just where do we start? Do we do every part of it? Um, and I know you've got a lot of insight into Éclair. I wonder if you could maybe just kind of give even the idea of like we have benchmarks in screening, but we don't necessarily with something like Éclair and why.
well, I think also it's highlighting that, right? Thank you, Jordan. Great question. So if I'm thinking specifically of kindergarten, Éclair can also be like if I'm teaching first sound fluency, then I can use Éclair to determine is it sticking, right? That's one of those pieces. But also, I'm thinking of SK students, those first four competencies would be something I would hope that I would be targeting that my SK students could all do that. And if not, it's really helping me define those small groups. So in kindergarten, those first four in particular, then we get to letter name, letter sound, which is also something that you would hope SK students would do. But I know with JKs, a lot of our educators are choosing to, okay, I'm going to choose I'm going to work on blending phonemes, then I'm going to actually use the Éclair to determine which students require additional support with this. So it really helps me target that small group instruction. And again, that the new spreadsheet will actually populate that section for you. So it helps you make those small groups. And I know that educators in our board, just the time, right? Just having time to be able to do it. And that is one other piece too, is chunking it in small pieces. So it might be that, you're choosing a few students that you're doing that one component with one day, and then the next day you're working with the next couple students. And also looking at, sometimes I know educators use additional manipulatives and gestures. So that's where the diagnostic, you're making note of those things because one day we hope to get to automaticity. So you're able to know, have they required those additional manipulatives or are they able to do this with automaticity? Go back to the question page here. So just thinking about I know there's some of you here, and I know that some thinking about your own results from the fall, and how you structure your time in your class. Think how might you consider Maybe is it one small group? I know that some educators, it's like, I'm going to find one small group and we're going to work together. I'm going to especially target those year twos because that's the screener data that I have. And using some of those pieces from next steps, I'm going to build those small groups and make sure that I'm providing them the supports that they need for that targeted skill.